So today we're going to do an album double, Load and Reload, which back in 2017 I decided I wanted to give these albums another shot since I didn't like them when I first heard them and I wanted to be convinced otherwise. And thankfully I was. I'm glad I went back to them with more mature ears. So let's jump into it, starting with Load, which came out in '96. After the monumental success of the self-titled Black Album, the legendary Metallica took 5 years to find an artistic stride towards new territory. Despite them selling multi-platinum copies and bringing hordes of new fans to heavy metal culture, their back-to-back Load and Reload records have been the mockery of metalhead snobs from then till now. The sad reality is I was one of them. Thankfully, my journey of musical discovery has led me to a place where I want to hear what the artist is about and not just what I think will satisfy my taste buds. Metallica were right there at the formation of my passion for music. My first and still favourite record of theirs, Ride the Lightning, carved my passion for this music, and being a young teen with Christmas on the horizon, I had the chance to scoop up more. Visiting the local record shop, I was captivated by the covers of Load and Reload and picked them as my next Metallica records. So imagine my disappointment not to hear more of that fast, dark and sleek thrash metal. Unfortunately, that sour first experience and the rarity of encountering fans that liked these records solidified my opinion that they were garbage. I owe a big thanks to the That's Not Metal podcast for prodding me back to these records. Their epic 10-hour talk covering every inch of history in detail, and they heaped praise on this period of the band's history. With the fire stoked again for this band, Load had been on heavy rotation, and with mature ears I can join them in their praise of a truly excellent musical period for the band. Where the old guard may moan that the thrash roots are gone, Metallica have moved on, evolving into a mature beast that channels the energy of old into hefty, momentous grooves and powering, throttling drives of weighty riffage that erupts among a band expanding their horizons. Broadening their palette, the Four Horsemen let the sounds of blues, country and hard rock accent the guitar tones, steady the pace to a strut, and shift the heavy to the grooving backbone as their new expressions become a focal point. Songs like Ain't My Bitch, 2x4 and Wasting My Hate stick to their guns, but the rest of the record flourishes with the new palette. Hetfield has to be given major props for his performance on this record. If the riffs weren't hard, thick and jiving enough, his vocal performance soars on many moments of the record with fantastic harmonious deliveries that will have you singing along. His mannerisms with the ooh and the yeahs reach a new level of infectious attitude as enthusiasm for his art, which just pours out on this record, most likely due to tuning inwards for inspiration. The social political commentaries of past are void, with practically every track carrying an introspective edge in his words. Like with the range of energy these songs carry, James matches it with endearing performances, like the emotional ranged country ballad Mama Said to the grit and gusto of the grisly Poor Twisted Me. At nearly 80 minutes, the album is loaded, mind the pun, by a band producing gold that might have needed some refinement, one or two less favourable songs trimmed, some unnecessary length on tracks too, but the reality is the atmosphere and drive Load has keeps its excitement from start to end. Maybe this lost treasure trove from one of my favourite bands is just too much for me at the moment, as I haven't wanted to skip a second of this yet. I think the variety the record offers has much to say, flexing chunky, heavy grooves between diversions into blues and country, lets the songs wind into different territories all while maintaining the grit of the biker gang persona that resonates. Free spirit on the road, man. Production-wise, we have an authentic aesthetic. You can feel the heat, sweat and sand of dusty winds and hot climates. Large drum kit is snappy, sharp and piercing. Every strike is heard as his patterns are always a strong fitting for Hetfield. Kirk and Jason sound somewhat underutilized, his 15 years in the band leading to a criminal lack of creative input that finds most of the bass lines backing the guitars with warm, thick mirroring in the bass that provides a meaty thud when James gets into the heavier riffs. Kirk's solos haven't had much of a mark on me. His role is heard emphasising the accent and tone Metallica are coming from, but his leads never overtook the expressions of Hetfield, who drives everything forward with his riffs and singing. If I were to be critical of anything, it could never be the artwork, the change in image the band undertook. Metallica aim to reinvent themselves, and that's exactly what musicians should do when it calls for it. Retrospectively, I can see how turning the axis on what's expected of metal music is so important for the genre to evolve, and perhaps their choices here have had unfound influences on the shape of modern metal. It's quite the shame that none of these songs grace the live show anymore. This is a fantastic period for the band, evolving their artistic expression and hitting the mark in the process. So now for 1997's Reload. Written in the same period as its counterpart, Metallica split the bulk of their material into two halves and recorded them in separate sessions, returning to the studio after a brief touring period to promote the first Load. Of this era I once dismissed, I do remember being significantly fonder of Reload, yet today it seems like the more varied of the two, a variety that has significant peaks and valleys. The opener Fuel and The Memory Remains are the most likely of all of these songs from both records to make a setlist. Followed by Devil's Dance, we are treated to an atmospheric brilliance as Metallica's creative juices yield stomping, crawling grooves and heat-soaked shady leads from Kirk, who drops in a marvellous solo, leaving his comfort zone and shredding wild screeches that revel in noise play. The vocal hooks are massive as James shows his harmonious range between the monstrous "yeah" shouts. Laden with the occasional effect-drenched background vocal lines, it oozes with charm from a band pushing their own boundaries. That high is followed by a low, The Unforgiven 2, a sequel song that doesn't hit the mark, lurking in the shadow of the original, and its borrowed riffs and adjustments just feel like a rearrangement rather than a second chapter. It's all made unbearably worse by the "You're Unforgiven 2" pun, not a favourable lyric. To my ears, this record definitely sounds like the second of a pair. If Load got all the first picks, it explains its consistency and flow in comparison. Reload goes down a few different avenues, yielding some duller tracks like Prince Charming and Attitude, which seem to lack a spark between the sets of reasonable riffs. On the bright side, it has some real wildcards in there, like Where the Wild Things Are, a song that narrows its metallic groove and surrounds it with sweet melodies, mostly from Hetfield, who really shows a soft side of his voice. A big shout to That's Not Metal for noticing the similarity between this song and Ghost. You can definitely hear it as a precursor to their style of music. Metallica gets some stick for this era, and yet there's a lot about it that has contributed to the trajectory of metal to come, especially the ditching of the strict, all-black metalhead uniform. The production, aesthetics and attitude of this record are much the same of what I said on my Load blog. Remembering perhaps being critical of Kirk, who felt a bit quiet on that release, yet here there are a few moments where he becomes a big focal point, especially when turning to big, steady atmospheric leads playing of reverb and slow bends on the likes of the remarkable closer Fixxxer. It's hard to pick a favourite of the two. Load is the better album, yet Reload has my favourite songs. Ultimately, I'm now gasping for more of this era that too many fans have dismissed. This era is a fantastic evolution for the band. Unfortunately, it is also the end of Metallica at the top of their game. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to see some more of my music blogs, go check the website out. Every page has over 1,000 articles sorted by artist, year, genre and more. Just hit Ctrl F and have a search for something that interests you. You can find a link to the blog in the description box down below, where you'll also find links to my other YouTube channels. Check them out if you are curious. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to subscribe to catch the next upload.